Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have an exciting program for you. I'm Joni Jeanette. I'm the Vanderbilt University School of Nursing alumni president for this year, and we love to do the sessions for the master's students and give you all some tips to bring forward to your career and your lifetime. And we have a great panelist this evening. I also want to thank Dr. Joshua Thornsberry, who is also the co-chair of this Know Your Value committee and is on the board, and also Betsy Usher, who's our alumni director at the School of Nursing. We could not survive without her, so thank you for all your help. Hannah Lowe, who is a past president of the alumni board, is going to facilitate this tonight. She's done this many times before and always does a great job. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to her, and thank you again for joining us.
Well, good evening, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I would actually like to start by introducing the panel and asking each panelist to share their background and how they've kind of come to this point and what they're going to share with us this evening. So I'll start with you, Dr. Hopkins, and we'll move on from there.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Happy to be asked to participate in this. I'm Leslie Hopkins. I've been on the faculty at Vanderbilt for 27 years now, and I'm the director of the Adult Gerontology Primary Care Nurse Practitioner Program. I also have the pleasure of teaching a course with Dr. Brian Widmar, who is the acute care director, on just this kind of a thing. How do you launch into your first professional role as a nurse practitioner? So I cover this in some class material, but I'm excited to join you all today. This is one of my favorite things to talk about with students.
Thank you. And Rishi?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rishi Mistry. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner. I graduated from Vanderbilt through the pre-specialty track in 2015. I am the medical director of a pediatric clinic, a community health center in Central Washington, Yakima, Washington. In my role as a medical director, I do a lot of interviews, hiring, all sorts of medical providers, physicians, nurse practitioners, PAs, and I also am responsible for hiring nurses, medical assistants. So lots of interview experience on my end. So hopefully I'm of some help to you guys today.
Awesome. And Amanda?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm extra excited to be joining you today. I am from the Career Center that serves our undergraduate population primarily. I'm coming from the expertise of the process of career development. I have over 7 years experience just in that topic, and I've been with Vanderbilt's Career Center for 5 years. Almost a little bit more than that. And then I have loved every minute of it, helping students walk through design and development and delivering their talents. A big part of that is feeling empowered in the process of their interview. So I'm really excited to be joining some really special people on the panel and love being invited.
Awesome. And I'm Hannah Lowe. I currently work in a startup environment where I also do a lot of interviewing and have built positions. So I'm thrilled to be with these other esteemed colleagues, and we're going to jump right in. So first, I think preparation is a key part of any interview. So I would like to start with Leslie and get her thoughts. If I'm the interviewee, what should I do beforehand to prepare for this interview?
It's a really good question, and something that maybe folks don't always spend enough time considering. So a few big tips would be, number one, know something about the company, right? Know their mission, know their philosophy, know the population that they serve, be able to articulate how those things mesh with your own personal philosophy of care and what you want to accomplish in your career. I think other things in this virtual world are to maybe practice doing some interviews. You can see my filler word is we all have a filler word. So when you record yourself and watch it back, as painful as that is, you can pick up what your fillers are. Maybe if you're not making good eye contact, looking at the camera, which is very hard for me. I want to be looking at the faces on the screen, but if you're looking at the camera, it seems like you're making the kind of eye contact you would make if you were in person. Test your technology. I think that's kind of a given, and it's super stressful if you think everything is ready to go and you're late for an interview, right? Because there's one little glitch in your Zoom plugin. And then the other things that we consider for in-person interviews that I think are a little different with the Zoom interview, and that is the attire. Like, you're only seeing my shoulders, right? So you don't have to have the full suit, but you do need to have the right kind of attire. You need to have the right kind of background. I have a ceiling fan going right now because it's hot in my house, but you don't know that because of the background I have. So you want to have few distractions visually, no auditory distractions, so that they are focused on you and what you say, and not all this extraneous stuff that may be going on behind you. And then I think the last thing I'll say here is, as the interviewee, remember that you are also interviewing them. This is not a one-way street. And I know that's a mistake that I made when I went out and was interviewing for my first job. I let them interview me. I didn't interview that practice well at all. And ultimately, I kind of paid the price for that. It wasn't a good fit. And I probably would have known that beforehand and not taken the job if I had been better prepared to interview them.
Awesome. And Amanda, I saw you nodding your head. I would love to hear what you might have to add there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I like to tell students over preparation is not a thing with interviews, because with practice comes confidence and you feel more empowered. And I know that's really easy to say as someone who has interviewed a handful of times and teaches other people how to do it, but you learn the method and the process of telling stories. You feel more comfortable with things that might have been asked before. As someone who's also participated on hiring committees, I get a notification if someone tests their Zoom link. So not only is it great for you to know your technology works, but you never know, that hiring manager, that hiring committee might be paying attention and getting the, oh, so-and-so tested their Zoom link. They're really proactive. They're really looking forward to this event, this interview, and it could do two things at one little moment, just hitting a button, testing your Zoom. So I love that research and preparation. You are the owner of your process, right? And I don't think that you can do anything too overt. Too much research is never a thing, because like Leslie mentioned, there is an evaluation piece to interviewing as well, that it's not just about, oh, I hope they love me, I hope they want me, I hope I answer all these questions correctly, but it's also evaluation. So to go into an evaluation process, you need to know what you're evaluating. So I just wholeheartedly support and encourage students to invest in the preparation, the research, and that investment pays off dividends.
That's amazing. So preparation, to summarize that, preparation is key. And I can also speak to the fact that it's very impressive when people sometimes feel like they know more about your company than you expect. It's a really big positive. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
So once you're prepared and you're on Zoom early, or WebEx, or any of the variety of great tools that people use, Rishi, what do you think are some of the key things to remember during the interview as things kind of get started?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is, and this may go back to preparation as well, is to make sure I would keep a notepad next to you, and then tell your the people that are interviewing you that I just have a notepad here on the side. If I look to the side, I'm just jotting down some notes. I think that note taking during an interview is really important because it'll help you. It helps you kind of organize the questions or the comments that may be coming through your mind at the time. And it also shows the person that you're interviewing that you're engaged in a way. So I think that's really important, just to have something near you where you can jot down a few things. I think it's also important to make sure that you're making good eye contact during the interview, even when it is virtual like this. I think during this virtual age that we've moved into with the pandemic and a lot of meetings, a lot of classes, a lot of just things that we were doing in person that are now on the computer, since that's kind of the norm now, we forget that you still have to have an active presence and not a passive presence, especially in an interview. So I think it's pretty important just to make sure, and kind of, again, going back to preparation, record yourself during an interview and have somebody interview you, and then watch it back and see, are you actively engaged? Are you making the right type of eye contact? Do you have anything like your ums that you're saying way too much? Don't focus too much on the ums, because we all do it and it's natural, but see if there is something that's standing out that's may not translate very well through a video call. I think it's also important to make sure you're not moving around a lot. So engage with the interviewer, but make sure you're not moving off to the side, you're not grabbing things. Set your space up correctly so that you're not doing a whole lot of that your dogs are maybe outside the door and not walking around you and bumping into you. And make sure to answer the actual questions that the interviewers are asking. And again, going back to practice and preparation, it can be very nerve-wracking to interview, especially for the first time if you don't have a lot of experience with interviewing for multiple different jobs. So a lot of times I've had interviewees that they don't know how to answer the question, or they're a little anxious, and I'd rather them take a pause and say, let me think about that question for a second. I'm going to take a couple notes and then respond, versus just rambling. That seems to happen quite often for those who don't have a lot of experience with interviewing, or maybe a little anxious. And I think that just recognizing that in yourself, stopping, taking a pause, definitely does help.
That is amazing advice. And I think I would kind of like to open up to the panel. Are there certain things you think that are nuanced and are important to consider if you're first initiating virtual interviews? Because I think there's some in-person versus virtual cues that can be interesting. So Amanda, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I would love to. I was writing down, and like even Rishi said, like I have my notes because I'm always going to be, you can't see because of my background, but I'm always going to be over prepared. I'm a notes person. It makes me feel more confident. And I would want you to feel the same way in your interview. So as he was speaking, we've done prep, we've talked about interviews as a panel. And I was thinking of all of the nuanced things that might make a student or someone feel more comfortable. As you probably noticed, Leslie and I both, in an undisruptive way, maybe took a sip of our water. I have found making your space a place where you're comfortable. It is completely normal to have a water bottle. You don't have to feel like a robot that you can't take a sip of your drink. That might even help calm your nerves if you need a break, or if there's a question that you're unsure on how to answer, to take a sip of your water. So you're not filling that time with rambling or filler words, but feel empowered to own your space. And that might be setting up your notepad and your water. So those things happened even just now in our panel. Another thing I wanted to mention was with answering the question, there are a lot of questions, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but in an interview, there are a lot of double answered questions, like, tell us a time you did this and how would you do something differently, where it would be considered like a stacked question, making sure you answer the whole question. That's a little bit of an interview tactic. Don't be afraid to ask someone to repeat a question. That is completely normal. We would much rather as interviewers see you think through the process critically and strategically than feel flustered or that you were anxious. So feel empowered to be yourself, to be human. If something weird happens, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a story from a student, like my dog barked or my mom came home or something weird that I hadn't planned for happened. And how do I handle that? It's okay to say, take a moment. I'm so sorry. My roommate just got home. We'll handle that. And let's get back to the question. So just name it, become a human in that moment. It's totally fine. They're humans interviewing you. Those are some of the nuanced things I kind of thought of as Rishi was talking.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, I think adding, recognizing the human element of your interview really will speak to, it'll help the interviewer understand that, these things are happening. It's okay. But it's going to be easier for you to speak it and recognize it than to try to ignore it and hide it, because half your brain is going to be trying to handle like, oh God, the dog's barking, making noises. I hope they're not hearing it, versus saying, I'm so sorry, my dog's barking. If you can kind of shut that out, I can shut it out too. I apologize. And then you move forward.
I think I'll just add, you know, you're bound to be asked something that you don't know the answer to. And it's okay to say, gosh, that's something I don't know, instead of faking your way through something. I think interviewers appreciate honesty. And as new graduates, I think it's important for you to tell folks, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, and I know that I'm not afraid to ask for help.
I love that. And another area I think that's important to know is screen and kind of facing your interview panel, perhaps what that looks like. So just confirming from the panel, you know, during an interview, a great question came up, is it recommended to look at the camera when speaking, or is it acceptable to look at the screen? And I think we've hit on this, but I just wanted to get one more poll here from you all.
It's hard for me to kind of answer, because even as a human, I find it kind of depends on if there's one person or multiple people. Am I using Zoom or another platform? But oftentimes, if you practice with Zoom or whatever platform it might be, you kind of learn, where can I look where it looks like I'm looking at the panel, or where does it look like I'm looking where I still feel comfortable, because staring at the camera feels uncomfortable to me. So I'm going to position the panel like mini screen somewhere where I can look at it and not have to stare at a dot. That's my opinion.
I agree with that, Amanda. And what is distracting to me is when somebody's talking to you like this and you're getting their side profile, or you know, you've got some weird angle on them instead of a conversational kind of direct facing.
I think that's a better note, is what are the things that stand out to me as negative? So you can't tell if I'm looking at you or looking at the camera. I can tell when you're looking down. I can tell if you're just talking to yourself, like off to the side, like on the computer. I've had interviewers do that. I have also had people, we've already talked about space, but who might have their computer set up, but they're in their car. That is very distracting as an interviewer. I strongly encourage you not to do those things. So I think those are kind of the big things to keep in mind.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both of you guys as well. I think what stands out to me is not so much, are they looking at the camera? It's, are they here in front of the camera? Can I see their face? Can I tell they're engaged with me? And they're not, you know, laying down on the sofa like this talking to me, or which has happened in an interview before, or they're in their cars, which again has happened too. So those things distract me more as the person doing the interview than like right now. I'm sure my eyes are not looking directly at the camera because I'm trying to look at, you know, the panel of the panel on their videos, but you know, you can tell I'm engaged and that's the point.
Great point.
Yes, presence is so key. And I think it's becoming more lax societally. So it's so much more important to, I think, in interviewing, do that. One other question back to notes that I think are vital. Experience with people typing their notes during the interview versus handwriting, because I've personally seen both and would love the expertise of this panel to answer if that's okay and what we think about that and taking notes.
I personally don't mind either way, as long as they've told me. So again, setting the expectation that I'm going to be taking notes on my computer. So if you hear some clicking and tapping, I'm not sending texts on my computer, or I'm writing with my pen right here as well. I think just setting that expectation. And then also, if you plan to do typing on your computer, I think it's okay to tell the person that you're interviewing with, is it okay if I take a second? I just wanted to jot down a quick note. I've had interviewees tell me that, and I don't get bothered by that at all.
That says something to me about their level of engagement. This is important enough that they're making notes. They may want to follow up on it. I mean, I just think it says something about the interviewee.
I will say there is, yes, we're telling y'all to take notes. There is kind of a caveat. We're balancing that with engagement, right? So we want you to take notes intentionally. Don't use that as an opportunity to feel disengaged, that you can just sit through the whole interview and type or write. There needs to be that balance. So naming it, like Rishi is mentioning, is very, very important, setting that expectation. And if you haven't at the beginning, or you're not taking notes at the beginning, take the moment before you write the note to be like, that's really exciting to hear, or I loved that answer, however your reflection is. And then I'm going to take a minute to write that out, or if you don't mind, I'm going to type that in my notes. Like, you can name it in the moment. Don't feel like you have to set the expectation at the beginning.
Key. So Amanda, I would love to hear thoughts around questions that might be commonly asked in interviews and expertise there.
Yeah, so I'm going to drop in the chat for everyone, because the Career Center has some really great resources on all different kinds of questions, especially those commonly asked questions. And what would I consider first round, which would be behavioral interview questions. So I'm dropping that in the chat. I hope everyone can see it. If anyone on the panel knows if I did that correctly or wrong, let me know. Okay, perfect. So a first round interview, or even into the interview, commonly asked questions, something I can tell you every time. They're going to ask you to introduce yourself. You might feel like, oh, they're inviting me to an interview. I need to prepare for all of these questions that I know they're going to ask, like about your motivation, about your qualifications and your experiences. Talk me through your resume. Tell me about this specific internship or placement. I can speak from personal experience. As when I was applying for a grad assistantship, the one interview question I did not prepare for was, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? So if I could, I would strongly encourage, and you can do that in a Zoom by yourself and record it. You can do that with a peer. A strategy that the Career Center encourages that students, if they've never had an elevator pitch or introduced themselves, is to think of it present, past, and future. So who are you presently, which could include, your name, what program you're in, something exciting, maybe at a placement, something that you're learning right now, but it's who are you presently? And then you can move on to what are some of your past experiences. Now, this is important, that are directly connected or speak to your specialization or discipline, based on who you're interviewing with. And then the last piece would be future goals. Again, connection is key. So they could be, students ask me all the time, well, what if I don't have a job title or a specific goal in mind, or should I lie? Well, number one, being vulnerable and being transparent is very important, but nobody's entitled to your whole life story or all of your goals in life. So yes, I encourage, you can have short-term goals, long-term goals, as long as it's future focused and they understand how this role is connected to your goals. So introducing yourself, I think, is a very strong start. They're almost always going to ask you that, or they might ask if you've done like maybe a Spark hire or a recorded interview before you're talking to people. Tell us something that we didn't learn from your recorded interview that you want us to know. So they're giving you opportunity to tell your stories. So those are two very commonly use tactics for you to introduce yourself. And that's the one place in an interview where you are the owner. So that's a place I would spend a lot of time. Commonly asked questions, as outlined on the Career Center website, you'll see walk through your opportunities, like, why are you planning for this career? So future focus, walk us through your process. Tell us about your past experiences. Tell us about this specific time. So we've outlined some of those, but it's important to also, when you're doing your research, correlate those to what you've learned about the position. We've also, and this is more than just commonly asked questions, and I encourage y'all to check this out, connect with your alumni, connect with your peers, talk about what they're hearing in interviews. That's a great way to kind of do a litmus test of, okay, am I preparing for the right kind of commonly asked questions? The other part of it is we on our website have provided a list of questions for you to develop, because that's a really, really important part. Because as Leslie mentioned at the beginning, it is not just, am I good? Do they like me? Am I a good fit? But really it's, how do I add to their culture? How do I add to their office? What am I evaluating in them? And we've outlined some of those. So I encourage you, be specific about what you want to learn about a company. Base those on your research. Maybe base those off of what you've learned from alumni who are in those roles or in those organizations. Those are the main two pieces of content I would want y'all to check out preparing. We do have a strategy for commonly asked questions and really behavioral interview questions, which if you've never heard about behavioral interview questions, they are predictive questions. So what about in your past experiences, can I ask you about a time you experienced a challenge or diversity or conflict? Can I predict how you're going to interact in our office or with our clients, right? So those are very commonly asked in the first round. And at the Career Center, we outline a strategy on how to answer those things, which is very similar to how we encourage students to talk about their experiences on their resume, which I know we're not talking about resumes, but this is our strategy. It's action, context, result, or outcome. So you tell your story in an interview, behavioral interview question, challenge, action, result. What was the challenge? How did I respond? What actions did I take? And what was the result? And the caveat there is that it does not have to be a positive always result. We all experience negative outcomes from things that we trial and error or learning experiences. If it is a story that has maybe a negative or a non-successful pilot, talk about what you learned and how you would readjust. What would you do differently? And we have on the website an example of that, a handful of different behavioral interview questions where you can practice that challenge, action, result. Those would be the biggest pieces of preparation I would tell a student to focus on, in addition to know what are illegal questions for someone to ask you. And we've outlined some of those on our website as well.
Awesome. And Rishi, Leslie, I would love to hear more about your thoughts around typical interview questions, or maybe even some that you know of that you've been asked that were kind of curveballs, or that you know colleagues have been asked.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on what Amanda was saying. I think it's important to take those questions that are very common that you'll find on any website in an interview and practice them and practice them and practice them. Don't just write down your answers, actually say them out loud with somebody or record yourself and get feedback from them. I think it's important because you're either not going to be asked those questions, you will be asked those questions, or you won't be asked those questions, but the questions you are asked, you can pull from some of the questions, those canned questions that you'll be asked, and it'll help inform like those curveball questions. Like, you know, I didn't expect to be asked about how would I approach doing a workflow for X, Y, and Z. Well, I can go to my, what are your strengths, and say, well, I'm very organized and this is how I typically organize myself, and then approach it that way. You may not have an answer for how do you actually do the workflow, but you may have an answer for how would you approach the workflow. So I think it's just important to practice those things. I'm trying to think of some curveball questions. I don't think that interviewers are out there to throw you off. I think they really just want to get a good sense of your capabilities, your abilities to perform in the job that you're being hired for. And that can come from how you're responding to questions. So going back to what I had said earlier, even if you don't have the answer to the question, you can take pauses. You can say, like Leslie said, you can say, I don't know the answer to that question, but here's what I can offer you as a response that may be tangential to what they had asked. Just don't get caught up in being anxious and start rambling about something. I think that's really important. Leslie, what are your thoughts?
Well, that's what I was going to say. You know, it's important to know thyself. And if you know you're a bit of a rambler, then you really need to do some practicing and hone in on what's really important for you to say and not just fill the space with words. I think it's also important to know if you can sometimes be someone who overshares a little. And so when they ask about, you know, tell us about yourself, you're not too forthcoming with stuff that they don't need to know, that doesn't impact whether or not you're a good fit for the job. So, and pay attention to body language. It's a little harder, right, on this kind of platform, but if you're talking too long, they're going to be disengaged. You need to pick up on those clues and, you know, land the plane.
That's awesome. And I think that so many people have amazing skills, and these preparation steps are key. I've probably done 40 interviews in the past 2 or 3 weeks, and situational and behavioral without a really solid answer is a really big deal. And we all learn. So I know we have great resources, and we can talk more about that. So, all right, we've gotten through this interview. We've made great contact. We've made our appropriate notes. So what about next steps, like a timeline? Or what are other ideas? And Rishi, I would love to hear what your thoughts are around this.
Yeah, I think that once you're done with the meat of the interview, you can ask the person you're interviewing with, what are next steps? You know, when can I expect to hear an answer, or what kind of answer will I hear? What is it can be assumed that they may be interviewing several other people. And I think it's perfectly fine to ask that, because most of the time people will say, we are interviewing other applicants. This is our time frame. We can get back to you within 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or something like that. So I think that's fine. I think it's also at the end of the interview, okay to ask for feedback on how you performed. So most people are going to know you're interviewing for multiple jobs. And so I think it's a good practice in humility. And it's also really important for you to know, you know, what did the interviewer think you did well? What could you have improved upon? And I think it's perfectly fine to ask that. And I usually offer that feedback too, if I'm asked that in an interview. I think that asking if there are other people that you can talk to is really important as well. So if you're applying for a nurse practitioner position at a practice of some sort, see if there's other nurse practitioners that would be willing to talk to you and ask them that. I think it's a little bit of a red flag if they don't say, yeah, if they don't immediately say, yeah. If they say no to you, you know, I would wonder why. But most practices that will offer you, or most organizations will offer you, somebody else in the position you're applying for to chat with and bounce questions off of. And I think that's really important for you in understanding whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. So you've read the organization's mission, you've looked at their value statement, you've interviewed with some of the leaders, but on the ground, you know, this will be getting to connect with somebody like, you know, another person in the role that you're applying for is really going to speak to you and give you some good understanding for whether or not this is going to be the right fit for you. So I think that's really important.
I just pick up on something that Rishi said, and that is red flags. So they don't want you to talk to anybody else that works there. Sometimes the red flags are more subtle. It's a gut feeling, like something about this just isn't ringing true, and you should listen to that. You don't have to figure out what the red flag actually is, but if you don't have a good feeling about a job, a lot of times there's a really good reason for that. And again, from personal experience, I had a red flag, and I just ignored it, and I found out what it was, but I could have saved myself some hard lessons if I had listened to my gut. And I think as a new provider entering a profession, you're like, well, everything feels like my gut's telling me all kinds of things all the time, and I don't know what to listen to. But talk to your peers when you think that something doesn't seem right, and bounce that off other folks, because a lot of times your gut's not going to lead you astray.
Just building off of red flags, since we're here already. Like we've been talking about, you're entitled to feedback. If you don't do that on the front end, like during the interview, feel entitled to ask about it if they tell you no. But also another red flag for me that I've noticed with students is pressure to make a decision. So if someone offers you a job on the spot or first round interview, it might be because you lowballed yourself. Who knows? It might be because they need an immediate fill, or who knows? But the pressure to make a decision on the spot can be a red flag. So feeling empowered is, I guess, my word of the day, which I love because I'm a social worker. But feeling empowered to say, you know, I'm going to need some time to reflect on this, or when do you need my decision by? Walk it through, practice it out loud. That is definitely a tactic to pressure people into making a decision.
And then there may be some questions that you want to ask that aren't appropriate for the person that you're interviewing with. So you're interviewing with a clinic manager, but you may have some questions that are appropriate for HR. At that time, I think it's appropriate for you to say, like, I have some further questions. I think they may be best fit for the HR director. Who could you guys connect me to, or can I get contact information? And save those questions for that time. I think sometimes in interviews, people ask me about compensation with benefits. And I think it's important. Like, I think you need to know what compensation is, and you need to know what benefits are. And for me, it doesn't bother me unless it's the first question that they've asked me of many questions they could have asked me. But I usually will just say, we can connect you with our HR director, but you can ask for that information as well. That's
so spot on. And the other thing I might suggest, I love the idea of others to talk to. And I think anytime I'm a family nurse practitioner by training, anytime I've looked at a smaller practice, not associated with a health system that might have one or two providers, I've often always asked to shadow, maybe not the whole day, but even a sense, and it has led to some decisions that were beneficial, and maybe a few I should have learned from, right? Life is a journey, but I love the value of this panel because it so much is advocacy for yourself. So I do think that answers kind of, and we can go back here. If they make an offer on the spot, what is a good time to accept? And I know we have another Know Your Value coming up around salary and contract negotiation, but any final advice there from anybody on the panel?
I mean, a phrase that I was told was never, ever accept the first offer because you need that time and reflection. The research that you can do based on your worth and your value doesn't just come from your inside knowledge. So based on all of the variables, you can meet with a coach or an alumni or a faculty member. There's so many people with an expertise who can tell you through their process. I think also as a woman, I think it's much more important from my identity to learn how to talk about money. So I encourage more and more students, just never, never accept the first offer, even if it's not a numbers game for you. Maybe it's professional development or mentorship or supervision or some parking, who knows, like some kind of layer to what's going to make your job, right for you. So never, never accept the first offer. So the way I would respond if someone offered me a job in the phone process or a Zoom process is gratitude. Even if you're having red flags, like those feelings that Leslie and I have had before. And you're like, oh, somebody wants me finally, right? Maybe you've had 10 other interviews before. Saying thank you so much. I appreciate your time. And if it's a panel, the panel's time, sharing your insights and your expertise, asking intentional questions. This has been a really great process. I've learned a lot. And then ask. I have told students in the past to ask for a specific deadline, but I would leave it open-ended in the sense of when would you need to hear my decision by? I think that's a phrase to keep in your back pocket. But knowing that you have ownership to say not now.
Yeah, and just to add to that, on the hiring side, I always want to make sure that I'm hiring right and not hiring quickly. There are going to be jobs and positions that you're applying for that they need a quick hire. They need somebody to fill a position as soon as possible. You may have impressed them so much that they want to offer you a job quickly before somebody else snatches you up. So kind of read the room a little bit, do research. A lot of times postings will have on them that need immediate hire now. And so you can anticipate that if they like you, they're going to offer you something quickly. But as Leslie said, follow your gut. Your gut's probably going to tell you the right thing. Tell them that you need time, like Amanda said. The whole process of hiring anybody, especially when you're a new grad, takes a long time. It's nothing that's quick and rapid. It's not like you're going to take a job and jump into it the next week. There's credentialing that has to happen, which takes forever. There's just a whole process. So just knowing that you do have a little bit of time and wiggle room for the most part for most positions that aren't doing immediate, urgent hires, and take advantage of that. Not to the point where you're negotiating for months and months on end, but know that like, if they say we need an answer by tomorrow, be reasonable and tell them like, that's not going to work for me. I could give you an answer in 2 weeks. Would that be reasonable?
I think something else we should mention is that imposter syndrome feeling. I know I am also a pre-specialty graduate of the FNP program from way back in the day. So I never worked as a bedside RN. My first healthcare job was as a nurse practitioner, but I had this real sense of who's going to want to hire me? Like, I've never worked as a nurse, and you need to spend some time negotiating your own imposter syndrome feelings, and understand that while you may not bring a great wealth of healthcare experience, graduating from one of the top nursing schools in the country, some of the top programs in the country, with a long, rich history. We were one of the first pre-specialty type programs in the country. Like, Vanderbilt knows what they're doing. We put out a good product. And so I would encourage those of you who have that really strong imposter syndrome to spend some time working on that and understand that you really do have a value to sell to potential employers.
I love that. There's two things that came to mind when both of the other panelists were talking. I'll start with what Leslie was saying was, I tell students, talk to your cheerleaders, talk to the people who know your worth, right? Call your best friend. I text my girlfriends, or I'll listen to my favorite podcast, or do power poses. Find what works for you that makes you feel like a really bad boss, right? Like the best person that is bringing their best to the table, because you do have worth, you do have value. That's what we're talking about today. And then there was something that Rishi said that made me think about boundaries, which we've kind of hinted on, but we haven't said directly, which is no one is entitled to all of your story. If during the interview process, like he said, it's a process usually. If a hiring manager asks you, well, who else are you hiring? No one is entitled to that information. That is your information. My job as a coach is to teach students that they don't have to tell everybody everything. What is pertinent to your qualifications, what is pertinent to the process, sure. But if you bring something up, even those illegal questions that you'll see highlighted on the Career Center, if you tell people something that's on that list, it's then privied for someone to ask you about it. So protect yourself in all things. And that includes your salary negotiation and your process. No one is entitled to know how many people you're interviewing for. Nobody's entitled to knowing certain pieces about your compensation. So know that. Boundaries.
Now that made me think of, oh, sorry, Rishi.
Oh, no, go ahead, Leslie.
Well, I was just going to say, we didn't talk about this when the panelists were kind of prepping for this, but as far as the boundaries, don't forget that employers go and look at social media, and some people are really good about setting boundaries with their social media and some aren't. And so I would encourage you all to just know that what you put out there is discoverable by your potential employers, and that can have a negative or positive impact. But it may be stuff you don't want your employer to know, right? So
it is literally the first thing that I do. I go to their LinkedIn, I go to their social media if I can find it. Yeah, and again, it can be positive or negative. So if you have a really awesome LinkedIn, great, know that I've looked at it. But if you have some things that you're like, oh, my Instagram's public, or I just made a TikTok, and those things can be problematic at times. I don't mean to sound like a fuddy-duddy. I love those things too. But what you decide to share with the world is also then on the table for me to know about you and question you about.
So next thought is, we've gone through the interview, done some debrief. We've held off on any quick decisions because we're thinking and negotiating and not taking that first offer. What are we going to do after the interview? I would love to think through a debrief, next steps. So Amanda, would love to start with you to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I think in the world, as far as follow-up, we've talked a lot about reflection. I'm a pro-reflection human. in writing down your feelings, writing down any things that came up that maybe you didn't take in notes as you were remembering who you met with, if it's a panel specifically, who you want to reach out to. While you have that captured time, spend it in reflection so that you can pay attention to it, right? Or that you can weigh and measure multiple interviews. Maybe you have 3 in a week. That can be stressful. I tell students 24 to 48 hours, reach back out to your interviewers. Even if you wouldn't accept the offer, if they're your top program or your top employer, I tell students go that extra mile. I'm from Alabama. I've got ingrained in me, write a handwritten note. And I think that it is the nice extra touch for your top people. I'm not telling everybody to go write handwritten notes, but if you do, I love it. Write me a handwritten note. I'll love it. But 24 to 48 hours with the world of technology, bring up something that you've written down in your notes, call attention to specific moments in your interview. That time frame, 24 to 48 hours is, I think, essential.
And just to add to that, I think that during your interview process, try to get to know a little bit about the people you're interviewing with and take notes on it. So that when you do write these thank you notes, which I think are very powerful, and I'm just like Amanda, I love thank you notes. I write them all the time, and I think they're really impactful. When you write them, you can reference, something that you learned about them, something that really stood out to you, something you connected with. It's very small. It's very almost effortless to do this, but it makes a huge impact on the person you're interviewing with. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would also offer is when you're done with your interview, I know that Vanderbilt has drilled in reflection in your training. I remember it, and I used to sometimes roll my eyes about how silly I heard it, how many times I'd hear it, but I do it so much now, and I'm so glad it's in my toolkit. Do the same thing after your interviews. Write down in a notebook, have an interview journal where you're writing down your almost immediate thoughts. How did it go? What did you feel? And because if you're doing a series of interviews, say you're doing 20 interviews over the course of a month, you really want to know what were your raw feelings or emotions about that job in the moment you had it, so you can reference back and say, okay, back in my reflection journal, which one stood out to me? Which of these 20 jobs did stand out to me? I think it'll help organize things for you a little bit.
I'll just tack on to the end of that. Don't burn a bridge. You're gonna interview with folks for jobs, and you're like, no, this is not a good fit. I don't want this job. I've been there. Knew within 1 minute of sitting down in the interview, this is not for me. But it was a nice connection to what led me to my next job, right? So be professional and tactful, even when you know this is not for you.
It's your professional network. Even if they're not for you, you might see them at a conference. Most likely you will see them at a conference. Something that just happened actually in this moment that made me think that we should tell the students about is not just write emails, but alumni Joshua just added me on LinkedIn. Add them on LinkedIn, send them a note there, go the extra mile. Those intentional, so shout out to Joshua. So go the extra mile, make the interviewer feel seen, that their feedback, that their time interviewing you was worth it. Because that's a big deal too.
It takes a lot of time and energy to interview people. And if they're spending a whole day interviewing, it's exhausting. I mean, Rishi knows better than I do because he does more interviewing, but it is gratifying, I think, to recognize that in addition to all the clinical work that he does, he's doing this as well. And it's just, it's nice to be appreciated. It's nice to have someone value your time.
I just wanted to add really quickly too, when you are going through interview processes at an organization, so typically the in-person interview or a virtual interview like this is the first step. But if you are in person doing interviews, ask for different experiences. afterwards. So, if you get a good feeling that they're interested in you and you're interested in them, if you want to shadow the team, like Leslie had said, like shadow a medical assistant, shadow the reception team, shadow a medical provider, see how the clinic runs and works, you're welcome to ask to do that. And again, it behooves you, because you're going to know and you're going to see and you're going to feel whether or not this practice or this job or this position is the right one for you when you're experiencing it at that level. And a lot of different organizations would accommodate that.
Awesome. So we actually have a chat question I would love to bring to the panel. And it says, this may be unique for the group, but I think it's perfect. Any advice for a veteran with decades of military service who's interviewing for the first time in the civilian world? I thought this was excellent. So Amanda, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I love this question because I think a lot of time we have students with a lot of different backgrounds. So you're looking at, your history, your background, your experience in a different field. If you've never interviewed, these commonly asked questions, these processes, no one's interview process is the same. So what you bring to the table is more diversity. You bring more stories that you can tell. So don't be afraid to weave in your experience in the military as a veteran as correlated experience to why you would be a strong candidate. I have so many students who might have studied one thing or started in one discipline, so have a lot of experience in one, and then apply it to a different field. So that transferability, which I would see as an employer, as a hiring manager, if you're able to articulate the competencies that are connected, that's showing duality of your thought, duality of how you're going to ask questions, how you're going to solve problems. So for you, I would go through those stories, thinking about the transferability, the core commonalities, but practice just like everybody else. So you can take a lot of the things that we've told you about interviews in general and just add your twist of making sure that you layer your stories. I wouldn't ignore and just talk about your experience in the medical field, but I would also layer it.
That's amazing to hear. And I think I've personally interviewed a few veterans recently and have colleagues that are also kind of coming into civilian life. And I cannot say enough gratefulness to service, but also to the richness that they bring to the team. And so I totally think that transition's a very big deal, but thankful to have colleagues and wish you all the best as you head that way in that process. So another question that came up is, what is the strangest thing that you've seen in an interview that you would advise avoiding?
How long do we have? Oh my goodness. I will give an example since I started. Yes, you are telling your stories, you are answering questions, you are being interviewed. There is also a balance to listening in an interview. And what I mean by that is you never know what the panel or what the interview has on the docket for what they want to address or what they want to question you about. So if you go into an interview and you turn your introduction, literally tell us something we would want to know about you that we didn't learn from your recorded interview, and you turn it kind of into a soapbox or just the you show, the Amanda show, and then turn it into, well, tell every question, you turn it back on the panelists. Well, why don't you tell me what the biggest challenge you think that I would face, or who do you think I would be collaborating with? Demonstrating, number one, you're not listening, and number two, you haven't done your research. So there is a balance of talking and listening, pontificating, going off on, your own tangents, which I know we've talked a little bit about rambling. I think this is a little bit different, where you go in with the mindset of, they can tell me about the job. No, that's probably the worst interview I've ever done in my whole life.
I think the one that comes to my mind is I had somebody laying on their sofa long ways with their cat right here like this, and they were just sitting there petting their cat the entire time while we were talking. And it just seemed, and it was for one of our medical provider roles. That's what we were interviewing for. And it seemed so, I was so distracted just by everything that was going on, that it was hard for me to focus on the interview. But that was bizarre. And then that in that same interview, every time I'd ask a question, I got asked, well, what do you mean? So I asked a question like, something like, what are your strengths? Well, what do you mean? Every single question. So everything about that interview was really bizarre. So it goes back to what the lessons hopefully you guys are taking from this panel today. It's that, practice your interview questions, get your setting right, look professional. Yeah, take what you will from all of that.
And I'll add just a couple of recent in-person and then some virtual health. I have had people tell me, I'm a family nurse practitioner by training, and many people that interviewed at a practice I was at previously would come and say, I'm just not going to do X. So I don't do pap smears, or I don't do children. And I'm all for safety. So like, I'm not advising we violate any DEA rules, but I was amazed at how many people told me what they weren't going to do. And I was like, well, this is going to be really hard because we do that, here. And then speaking frankly, from the virtual environment, I'm amazed now for anyone looking to get into telehealth at how many people may not be interested in the company or the mission, but they want to work from home. And it has been fascinating how that comes through again and again. So perhaps that's not bizarre, but it's a really big turnoff. And I guess if I were giving it a numerical value, like 65% of my interviewees, it doesn't really matter about the company. It's, I want to work from home, and what hours am I expected to be here? So all want healthy boundaries. And yeah, so in closing, the next two know your value events will be around salary and contract negotiation, and also networking. So all key parts of, I feel like this panel would be amazing at each of those as well. And so this will be coming out in the student newsletter and social media for registration and dates, etc. And really would encourage you, in the spirit of reflection, to really think about the learnings here and maybe even one thing you would take away. And most importantly, a tremendous thanks to all of the panelists and to the Alumni Association for putting this together, and all the best as we go forward. Thank you so much and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.